My name is Phil Hill.
Okay.
You want me
Great.
to look at the camera?
Just look at me.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll ignore
Okay.
these guys. So thank you for letting us come in, barge into your life like this. One of the things I know you've been involved with cars your whole life. What's your first memory of a car? I mean, have you always been attracted to cars?
Um, I know that I've always been attracted to cars. In fact, it was a super attraction. I found a letter from my grandmother in the last year, written to her next to youngest daughter. My mother was her youngest daughter, and my grandmother was saying to Aunt Neva, the babies are now speaking, and Sonny, that was me, speaks in sentences. He says over and over again, Auntie's car and garage. And the amazing thing about it is that it's that garage, and the car is still there. And that was 70 years ago. It was more than 70 years ago because it was in May of, I guess it was. It was just I was a month over 2 years old.
So this was
Auntie's car and garage, and I was obsessed with it. I never knew about that. You understand? I read it in this letter,
that's funny. That's
and
funny.
but I can remember the ensuing years. I can certainly remember. I remember the year the Pierce came, right out here, the 1931 Pierce that took Best of Show in Pebble Beach in '55, and so I can remember that. Naturally, it's been reinforced by further memories, but nonetheless, it's a memory. And
So there was just something about cars that
yeah,
sort of.
something about cars.
Well, I understand though when you got your driver's license, you like to take cars out occasionally and drive fast around the neighborhood. Did you do that?
Oh, I did it long before I had a driver's license. In fact, I had a car out here. I got a picture of my Model T in 1939 sitting right out in front of the house here. Uh, and I was only 39. I was 12. So I'd sneak it out, tear around in it, and just about the time the police should be coming, it'd be back in the garage again. And when they did catch me, in those days, it was simply a knock on the door and a scolding by Bobby Clark in front of my mother or whoever it happened to be, and being told to don't do it again. And that was
But it sounds like it didn't quite work. The
no, it
scolding.
didn't quite work.
So was Bobby Clark was the local?
Bobby Clark was a local, a very mean, nasty, with a horrible reputation motorcycle cop. But compared to what you can get today from a cop, he was nothing. I mean, down below there was a heart and the consideration for not wanting to make delinquents out of children and all that sort of stuff that today seems to pass by. You're a bad boy if well, let's not get into that.
Yeah, but so you just love taking cars out and driving
Yeah,
fast.
yeah.
What were the streets like around here? I mean, could you actually do that without sort of?
Yeah, the neighborhood was very much as it is now, except there were a lot of vacant lots. And like this was the last house before the second house from the corner before San Vicente. So it was almost all vacant lots and all vacant lots to the other side. And the trees were much smaller than they are now. These trees, these deodars out here and the cedars on the other side.
So there was lots of room.
Yeah, lots of room. The alleys were all dirt, and they were the most fun, especially after it rained. And I've had that pier slithering around the alleys with all the school kids in the back. It was terrible. You just never get away with it today. It would just be so non-PC that you couldn't do it. And of course, in those days, all of the people were probably first-generation drivers, or at the most second-generation drivers, and they all remembered how they, in the innocent days of the beginning of the automobile, would do the same thing. Go out, whether it was a farm field or a city street or whatever. It was probably done illegally, some way or another. They didn't have a license, something.
And it was just big fun.
Yeah.
Well, so when you did get your license finally, you still just you still kept doing it.
Yeah, but it was sort of old hat by then. By then, there wasn't the intrigue, and there wasn't the what? There wasn't the when it's
The forbidden nature.
yeah,
of
when
it.
it's forbidden, there's much more verve involved.
well, but somehow you channeled that sort of love for speed into racing.
I did. Yeah, that was what I sort of did, was drive, and then I never really planned on being a racing driver. I sort of backed into that. I never thought of competing against another person. I mean, that ground was I, a child, knew how to drive. Almost nobody did, and they all treated me like I was something special, which obviously I needed to be thought that way of, and it just fed on itself. And so then when the racing came along, I couldn't back out of that. I had to keep going. So then I became a race driver, but not because uh, because I was competitive, but within reason. And the racing thing seemed a bit much. But at any rate, it proved not to be.
Well, my understanding is you first started racing though in an MGTC. Was this sort of the standard sports car of the day? I mean, how important was the MGTC and sort of sparking interest in the United States in sports car racing and that?
The MGTC, when it first appeared in on the West Coast, anyhow, I think it beat us here by a year, maybe. 1946 would be the time that the first cars, I think, came into the East Coast, and maybe we had a few here privately brought in by then. But by 47, I mean, they were coming in, and I immediately quit the job at the Packard agency and went to International Motors, and got a job there, and they were Rolls and Bentley. They were about to become Rolls and Bentley agents, and they had the whole Nuffield line, which included MG and Morris and all that stuff, and then there was Riley's, and oh gosh, it just hardly a month went by without getting a new franchise for a new make.
So this was pretty much like I hate to say like hog heaven then for somebody.
It was just so heavenly you wouldn't believe it. And of course, I was so freaked out on the whole thing that, and I would have worked 24 hours a day if they would have let me. And so consequently, they gave me a key to the place, and I was like, let's see, that was 1946, 46, 47. I would have been 19 and 20, and I was 19 and 20 going on 16 maybe. And so I was just totally childlike about my enthusiasm. And so, gosh, I'd go over there at night, take my friends in and show them the whole place, the inside out of everything I was working on and everything. And I annoyed Roger Barlow and Louis Van Dyke, the owners of the place, by my not being able to really focus on earning money for the company. It just so it was great stuff.
That's great. So, and then they somehow let you or encouraged you though to take some of the cars out and enter.
Oh, they didn't have to. They didn't have to. No. I did that automatically. And I was whenever Clark Gable come by or Gary Cooper, or somebody like that, and wanted to drive in an MGTC or something, I'd take it out and scare the living hell out of them because they could see the idiot way that I was trying to see how far sideways I could get it without going around backwards or something. And of course, that wasn't really the mature way to view. And of course, over there on Alden Drive, where Cedars Hospital is right now, that was all lots of vacant places around there too. So you could see your way around corners and take giant lurid slides demonstrating the abilities of the car and all that sort of stuff.
So these guys would basically buy a car if you just drive them back to the shop.
Yeah, just right.
Let
Yeah,
them
yeah.
out of the car.
Yeah, they either never showed up again or,
Well, that sounds great. So this was it, and this was really just the place for you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you ended up in 1950 at Pebble Beach in a Jaguar XK120, which is a pretty new car.
That's right.
Now, how did you end up with this pretty fancy?
The company had moved from Alden Drive, there on the border of Beverly Hills, Robertson and Alden. They had moved to Wilton and Sunset, just at the time that the freeway was being put through. The Hollywood Freeway. And they were taking out all the apartment houses all around there and everything, but they did not take out the building at the corner of the southeast corner of Sunset and Wilton, and that became the new shop of International Motors. And while there, that was the spring of 1950, or no, it was the fall of 1949. Uh, they they said, we want you to go over to Europe and or to England and go to some of those darn service schools, so you'll have better credits as far as being first class mechanic and all that. So boy, they offered to pay half my way over there and everything. So I took a freighter over in late November of '49, and from Boston took a train to Chicago, and then another train from Chicago to visited my uncle and my cousins in Schenectady, where my family had been many generations in the Mohawk Valley there. And then they took me I took a train to Boston, from Albany to Boston, got on this freighter. What was it called? Gosh, this thing is going to go on forever if I keep on.
Yeah. So, but you ended up though. You ended up finding the XK120, and you ended up.
I didn't find it. I went over to England. Immediately met off to England of the Jaguar place, of Jaguar factory. He was managing director or service manager at that time. And in no time flat, I found out from communicating with International Motors here that because of my being an employee of theirs, I could get a car. And so, God, then I thought, how am I going to get rid of the MG? So they sold the MG for me. I borrowed money from all my relatives and everything and got an XK120. After finishing all the schools, SU carburetors, Lucas Electrics, and all that sort of stuff, I went. Rolls-Royce got me a ticket in steerage on the Queen Mary, and then I got upgraded to what's above steerage, second class, and so I had a cabin in second class and was able to take my car as personal baggage. So I got to New York, took the car off, drove clear across the country, and within weeks had stripped the thing all down to, the windshield off and all that sort of stuff, and had driven at the races at Santa Ana, what's the name of that? What is it? A blimp base, Santa Monica blimp base, where I had a really horrible battle with a guy in a Cat Allard who beat me. It was more powerful. So anyway.
So what did you think of this new car?
The XK120? I thought it was great, but I was annoyed that the Cat Allard would run off from it on the straightaway. So I proceeded to fix that and bored it out to 3.8 liters and Winfield ground the camshafts and raised the compression to 9-to-1 with big dome pistons made by some guy in Los Angeles, and then got almost 400 pounds of weight out of the darn thing. And you can't imagine how that happened. And then ended up winning the Pebble Beach race with that car, which then would see off the Allards.
So you really, I mean, this was definitely then not a standard XK120, but I'm sure that certainly helped Jaguar's sales when
I think it did.
saw that.
I think it was the first victory they had over here, if I'm not mistaken. That was the first victory that Jag had in the United States.
Well, what was it like?
November 5th, 1950.
What was it like going up to Pebble Beach at that time? This was a pretty primitive course. I mean, this was road sports car racing was relatively new in the United States, and what was that race like?
That was the first real road that we had as a road race. They called the things at Santa Ana a road race, but all it was a bunch of hay bales marking out a road on the airfield there, on the blimp base. It's a big airfield. And so this was the first real proper road. And Pebble Beach was a much quieter place than it is today, and much less settled. And the Pebble Beach Lodge was there, but it was sort of looked at as the new place because the old one had burnt down in Monterey, I believe, and then it became the Naval Academy, right? Which it still is, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
whatever. But at any rate.
So when you went up there, this was relatively new, and there were a couple of other people like Sterling Edwards.
Sterling Edwards, yeah, he was one of the prime movers of getting the race there.
And what did you think about the field that you were going up against? How did you feel about when you entered the race?
I didn't even think about him at all. I just knew that I had really gone overboard. The brakes were so horrible on them, and they had already established a bad reputation brakes-wise. They had had a race while I was in England at Palm Springs. That was on the periphery roads around an airport, and this was just before I came back home, and the Korean War was just about to break out, if you'll remember, in spring of '50 then, and you wouldn't remember, but I mean it was, and so. Um,
So you were there at Pebble Beach. You'd fix the brakes. You'd fix the.
Not only that, I had cast up some cast wheels with the drums cast right into the into the aluminum wheel, and they transferred the heat into the wheel. It was great. I mean, for a short time they had brakes, but it got the heat out to the rim so fast and in such quantities that it had set the tires on fire. And once you get a tire on fire, nothing will put it out. You got to sort of submerge it or something. You know, nothing will put out a tire that's burning. So that was the end of that. I mean, so we went back to the stock wheels, and I drove without brakes finally. I mean, the brakes just went away. The lining came off. We relined them between practice and the first race, right there on the spot. Relined the brakes, and it was just hectic chaos. And then the clutch exploded in I think the preliminary race, and that was from over revving, I suppose. The casting that constituted the pressure plate was not of good enough quality, and it just flew to bits with a little bit of over revving. But fortunately, the pedal fell to the floor, but the clutch was still engaged. So that means that the thing went into a bunch of pieces, but the springs were all still in there, and they were all holding this mess and gripping the driven disc. Does that make sense?
So you were still able.
So it would still drive. The engine would drive the wheels, but you could not disconnect the clutch. Do you follow? So from then on, they made me start at the back because I had to start in first gear with no clutch, because the pedal fell on the floor because all the throw-out mechanism went forward when all the junk broke. You understand? As if you were disengaging the clutch. But all these angled bits of broken pressure plate all stuck. They all, even though, you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, so it was all stuck together. But
Yeah, it was all stuck together, and it shook a bit because it was now out of balance. But other than that, it was just fine. So once I got rolling, and the trick was you put it in first gear and push the starter button, and it would go, it would jerk along like that, you know. And then finally it would start to catch and start, but it never would quite, it was a racing engine, you know, by then. And it wouldn't really catch hold enough. But finally it did, and off I went. And once it was underway, then I just timed it as if it did have a clutch. I just shifted. Have you ever tried that with your car?
Yeah,
It works, but it works pretty good. The faster you go, the easier it is, believe it or not. The faster you go, the more you can be precise about getting the rev just right. You don't have to worry about a clutch anymore because it's gone.
So you drove the whole race?
Drove the whole race without the clutch. And it didn't fly further to bits or anything. It just,
And you started in the back of the pack?
Started at the back of the pack, and I won. Yeah. It was really it was, you know, what do you call it? It was one of those dream stories that, too good to be true. And all the hot stuff got hotter and boiled away, or for one reason or another, fell by the wayside, and that darn thing just kept going. And finally, God, I got this message from Richie Ginther on a sign that said "Long Lead," and I thought, who the hell's Long? And so at any rate, it turned out that naturally it didn't take me long to figure out that I was in the lead, and I had a long lead. So he was trying to tell me to slow down. And so then the fog rolled in, and it was just super.
That's great. That early course, though, I mean, it had some pretty rough patches. It had
It did.
dirt and
Yeah,
pavement.
it did.
What was that like?
It was in the woods, not far from the lodge, and it went through what's known as the what are those? The what grounds?
The
Polo grounds or something like that. Yeah, and it went through there. Did a little dog leg to the left. Went down to a street. It's all on record. If you look at an early program, I've forgotten the name of the streets. I can remember them though the second I ever see it. But anyway, you do a right turn, then you went just a short run, not even enough to get up into second gear or get enough up into third gear. But then immediately you had to come down into first and do a more than 90 degree, and then you came out of the turn in first, and then in second, and then you went on through the woods in these gentle wavings back and forth, and then you were really going like mad. I suppose you were going close to 100 miles an hour by the time you got down to the end, and the road was very narrow, lots of trees, and snow fencing to keep the people back. But then they had it. There was a dirt chicane. I mean, a series of hay bales that laid out the chicane, and gosh, that Jag really did a great job through there. It was sort of light in the back because of all his weight taken off, and most of it came out of the back. So that was his one weakness, was it was front heavy. But it meant there was plenty of power to adjust the attitude of the car going through that chicane on the dirt. You know what I mean? So you slide around there, you go another couple of 100 yards on the dirt, and then slide out onto the pavement on Stevenson Road. Is that the name of it? Whatever it is, coming down the hill there. And then that was it. You went all the way down to the bottom, a great big turn, the one where the Alfa is on, and up to the start and finish line.
So it sounds like it was actually kind of a fun course to drive.
It was, yeah. But it was quite dangerous. There was plenty of trees to hit. Ernie McAfee was killed in 56 against a tree.
Well then, so I think that was your first major success, and then you came back the next year though in an Alfa. So you
No, I came back the next year in an Alfa. Yeah, that's right.
Right, in an Alfa. So
Yeah.
so you've done all this work to the Jaguar, which was
Yeah.
a new car.
It was
and suddenly you went and you bought a car from 1938. This is 1951. Why
I know,
did you
yeah.
buy a 1938 car?
Well,
Take that out
there was
front.
one hell of a lot more sophistication to the Alfa of 1938 than there was to the Jag of 1950, 50 or 49 or whatever it was. In that it was a real race car right from the start. You know, they had roller bearings and all the four-wheel independent suspension, roller bearings and all the suspension parts and everything else. Twin overhead camshaft, straight 8 with double superchargers and an engine almost as big as the Jag. So it was really a more powerful car than the Jag, quite a bit more powerful than the Jag. And
And this was a car that actually had a racing heritage.
we had a racing heritage. It led the Mille Miglia in 38 for a long, long time up until the last half hour. But at any rate, it was a fabulous car and everything. But I was just, as I told you, I was 29 or 20 going on 16 or something. I didn't have enough sense to know what the right thing to do was. And I certainly should have kept the Alfa because I paid $1,500 for it. It came from the Tommy Lee estate. When he jumped out of a window while I was in England, he committed suicide, and all his cars then went up for sale. And this car I bought, and then sold it for $4,000 just a year later because I realized that it wasn't going to be able to do the trick, and I didn't have the money to be the engineer to figure out why the scavenger pump didn't keep the sump clean of oil, and everything would froth up, and then oil's coming out the cam covers, and it's got a 30-quart tank in the back, and it was I couldn't deal with it and still earn a living, you know. So I had to sell it. So I sold it, and you wouldn't believe what the most recent price was. I think it went for over $3 million. So
Oh well, we all have.
I hear about it from my wife all the time, you know.
We all have 20/20 hindsight, I guess. But actually, for racing, though, for your purposes, you won again, right?
I did win in the Alfa, yeah. I won the, what do they call it? The Cypress Cup Handicap or something like that. Forget what it was. Oh, and also, just after I passed the Ferrari, the first Ferrari we'd ever seen on the West Coast, Kimberly rolled it right there where the road had changed the year before into the dirt section. Right there, and going around the new left, he rolled it and really made a mess of it. Within a short time, he had a whole crew out there serving lunch to all the spectators on big, long tables. And his bashed up Ferrari there as a centerpiece for the... it was really days that you wouldn't see today.
So the things have definitely changed.
Definitely changed.
Well, you went
Things
over.
have definitely changed.
You went over to Ferrari though. When in 1955, you were
53, I went there the first time.
Okay. But I know. Let's see. In 55, you had the 750 Monza in that, and
At Pebble Beach.
at Pebble Beach.
Yeah. I'd already been to Europe, though, and done some racing there. I raced in the 12-hour race at Reims in a Ferrari, a 4.1 as we called them then. It would be called a 340 millimiglia or something today. But at any rate,
So why the Ferrari? Was that then the car to have? Was that the most sophisticated?
yeah, well, Ferrari right off the bat. In fact, let's see, what year was my Ferrari there the first year? 52. 52, the little Ferrari that I had bought from Canetti. It had been in a fatal accident at Le Mans. It was painted blue because it was a French entrant. Le Riviere was his name. He went off the road at Terre Rouge and was decapitated on a piece of barbed wire. And so at any rate, I got the car and fixed it up and made it and improved it to a degree from by making it more like it was when it was new and maybe a little bit better. Did some odds and ends. One thing I did do that really helped, I put a Mark 7 Jaguar anti-roll bar across the front, and it really kept the inside rear wheel down on these rapid in transition turns where you'd yank the right rear wheel off the ground, and it was just like someone switched off because they had no limited slip in them. So it was just like somebody turned off the key until this wheel came back down. And then you could get some drive out of the corner. You follow? Well, with the Mark 7 Jag, it understeered like mad because of the anti-roll bar up there. But by changing the whole driving method, you could sort of skate the car around in the tighter stuff and always have drive to the rear wheels, you know. So that was the crux of it.
Before we actually get into 1955, just going back to that first year that you raced there, do you remember the concours part of the event at all? Was there much going on in that end, and what was that like?
I was aware of it. I was aware of there being a concours at the same time, and I was, of course, always had been keen on cars and old cars particularly. I still had the car, still do today. I have the car that I came home from the hospital in when I was born, 1918 Packard, and so I had that interest. But this new racing thing had bitten me, and so I didn't pay that much attention to the concours that for the first few years.
And it wasn't really that big a part of it.
It wasn't that big part of it. It was sort of a snobby, a bunch of fancy people getting their cars together, their fancy cars together, and there was a lot of dealership representation also. They were showing their new cars, you know, that were coming in from Europe and all that.
But the race really overshadowed everything.
Yep, yeah, it did.
Let me fill up your glass for you. Curly, could you fill up? Let me know when we're good.
You have speed.
Okay, super. Yeah, then we'll jump ahead now to 1955 again.
Okay.
So you won again at Pebble Beach, this time in the Ferrari.
Well, of course, I had one in '53 in the Ferrari.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I had one in '53 in the Ferrari, and that was my first. The next car that I won in was not only an Italian car like the Alfa had been the year before, but it was a Ferrari, and it was brand new. I was doing well enough in the racing that Luigi Canetti, who prides himself in being able to pick out the types that might do some good for him, and I was one of them. I was just sort of a nutcase, and he could pick them out, you know. And if they didn't kill themselves, they served him well.
So he gave you a car and put you in?
He didn't give it to me. I had to pay for it, but it was a very, very good price, as the one before had been.
So then by 55, though, you have the Monza, and you're racing at Pebble Beach again.
Okay, well, no, you don't want to touch on the '53.
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, '53 was great. We drove the car all the way up there. Bill Spear had a 4.1 liter Mexico model, and we drove them from here I drove them with my girlfriend at the time, and I can't remember whether Spear was alone or not in the car. I think he was. But we drove all the way to Pebble Beach uh, with the cars, and they lined them up uh, in relation to their cubic displacement, like at Le Mans. And so I was way back in the back because of the fact that it was a 2.9 liter, and there were lots of 6 liters and everything else up at the front, Cadillac Allards and this and that, and some specials, and then Spear in the 4.1 and a lot of stuff. So I was way back there. But at any rate, and it actually had rained a tiny bit. But within not too long, I picked them off one by one by one by one by one, and finally I got to the Allard of the Allard, that was such a hot car that had won the year before, I believe. Um, Bill Pollock in the Cadillac Allard. And anyway, I got him and won the race. So that was stupendous also. And Ferrari was very happy. I got into their, I think I got into their annual magazine prominently for the first time. And wasn't just Philip T. Hill Jr. I became Phil Hill that time in the magazine.
Great. So Pebble Beach then became recognized as a pretty
Oh
important.
yeah, absolutely. Pebble Beach then became recognized as a pretty big time place.
Fabulous. So then you continued on with Ferraris then, and in '55
In '55, I had won. We thought we had won at Sebring. We had driven the last hour of the race as if we were in the lead. That was what our team had us, was in the lead. And then as we drove up onto the ramp, Carroll Shelby and myself, his arm in a cast from the crash in Mexico, it was no longer broken. It had already had a couple of months in the cast, but it needed some help, and so he had his arm in this cast and did quite a good job of it. At any rate, we then were told by Briggs Cunningham's people and Ugolini, the timer guy for Canetti and Mazzaro, and I'd say it was getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Phil Walters and Mike Hawthorne actually had won and actually were a few seconds ahead of us without us knowing it. We thought it was a whole lap plus a couple of seconds. But our team had made a mistake in the lap timing over the 12-hour period. So they, in fact, we were all but had the wreaths around our neck, and we were protested and pushed off the ramp, and so that was very disappointing. But at any rate, I put the car on a trailer, drove it clear to California. Alan Giberson bought the car, and I drove it and won at Pebble Beach in 1955 in the rain. And that was really something, because with all those trees and everything, but it was a kind of a place that you could get to know the puddles. You could get to know where they were, and you could either splash through them to help clear them for next lap, or avoid them, whichever. It was doable.
So it sounds like you actually enjoyed the road courses.
Oh, I did. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, of course, there really wasn't much other than road courses then. Oh, you mean as opposed to the airport circuits, airport courses?
Even the tracks,
Yeah, well, we didn't have any. Well, let's see, did we have any oval tracks then? Yeah, I guess we had still a few, but with the road courses, in those days, it was dishonorable to drive a road racing car on an oval. I mean, it was just really not on.
Well, in 1955, you won on the track, but you also did something else. You won at the concours.
Yeah, that's right, with the Pierce Arrow, the blue Pierce.
So that was a pretty big year.
That's right. That was tremendous. Yeah. In fact, I've got a picture. I think it's with Gwen Graham, who looks very nice and Pebble Beachy, and she's being very graciously smiling at me as if she's pleased to give me this trophy. But I am the most scruffy looking. I've just come from where the races were, and I've got this dirty cords on, and I just look like a mess. And so anyway.
You don't quite look Pebble Beach.
Don't look quite Pebble Beach.
Well, but somebody's told me that was a real turning point for the concourse. That you brought up the 31 Pierce Arrow, and that won Best of Show, and that really started to change things at Pebble Beach. Why is that?
I don't know. I think most of the people sort of thought that you had to be in the automobile business, or you had to be a dealer, or a garage owner, or something to be able to have a car good enough and prepared good enough to, or it had to be a brand new car or something like that in order to win. And of course there had been some people that had won with, of course, with some very wonderful old cars. But I think mine was the first one that was a real restoration, proper restoration right from the ground up. And of course, the car was how old then? 55. It was bought in 1930. So it's 25 years old. Is that all? 30, 40, 50. I guess it is. Only 25. Car was only 25 years old, but I restored it anyhow, right from the. And it was one of those while we're at it jobs. I was so keen on doing it that I thought, while we're at it, we might as well take the body off the frame. And then while we're at it, we might as well, and so finally it went right down to the last bolt. And it was really the first full ground up, body off restoration of a classic that, as far as I know, had ever been done. And so it set a new standard as to what the cars ought to look like on the field. And of course today, now we're hearing a lot of fuss about over restoration and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know what to think. The car looked very much as if it were new, except that the paint wasn't all faded. And it just, 25-year-old lacquer in those days looked not so nice. And if it hadn't been cared for and never brought out in the rain and all that sort of stuff. But at any rate, it looked really first class, and it beat out Rolls Royces and all kinds of stuff. And I'm proud. I'm still very proud of that. And it was not over restored. It was restored just like it was when it was new. To be just what it was when it was new.
No, this was a car though. I mean, you hadn't just gone to a lot and picked this up and decided to restore it. I mean, you'd known this car.
Oh, I was 3 years old when the car was delivered right outside here, and I remember it just like people say, "Oh, you can't remember when you're that young." Well, let me tell you, you can. I remember it, and I've remembered it any number of times when it was brought up right in front of the house here. And it has never not stayed in the garage here. Still there.
Well, you kept entering cars, I guess, and you won the Best of Show again in 1977 with your 1927 Packard. What was that? I mean,
I won again in 1977 with the Murphy convertible sedan Packard, 1927. That was a very controversial car because it's purple. And everybody said, "Oh, you don't want a purple car," and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I had seen the standard Packard purples in the custom line from another original car that year, and I wanted that darn Murphy, which had been a very muddy, two muddy shades of mustard, and so it's a purple Packard. And it won Best of Show.
So what is it? I guess, and again, then you had a 1912 Packard later that won.
That was earlier. That was in 1973. That was a 1912 Packard, and that was absolutely ground up. I mean, that was such a, everything was, the leather, the top, everything was shot in that car. So, and we weren't into this ethereal view toward treating it like an old piece of, like a Stradivarius violin or a piece of furniture or something like that yet. I hope that won't continue too far or go too far overboard with that sort of thinking. Those are my sentiments. But at any rate, I restored that 1912 Packard to, as accurately as I knew how, to be what it had been when it was new, and with even further attention to detail, which I felt was legitimate in that this time it was sort of forever. It wasn't going to be a 2 or 3 year old car and then scrapped and making room for the new car, the 1915 Packard 48 or whatever, And so Anyway,
So how hard is it to restore a
Can
car?
I just let you to adjust your tie? I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just center your tie up? It's just
Oh.
hold on to the side. There you go.
Fabulous, thanks.
thank you.
But how hard is it to restore a car to the level of Pebble Beach and to make it a winner? Is this something that can this wear the average person out doing this kind of thing?
I don't know. I think when they're restored back to where they should be able to win anywhere. If it's a first-class winner, Pebble Beach might be one of the toughest places for it to win. But I think there are other places, maybe nothing like the prestigious presentation and all that Pebble Beach has. But now that we got off into that, the car becomes the winner. And it's a tough job to meet the standards that Pebble Beach has.
Basically, there are some people. I think of yourself, and I think of people like J.B. Nethercutt. How important has sort of his efforts been in establishing sort of the level of restoration? I look at the cars at Pebble Beach, and they're knockouts. One after the other is knockouts. Have people like J.B. Nethercutt been important?
Yes, and Bill Harrah, in years gone by, of course, was another one that was devoted to the whole car thing. And your question was,
well, how important has J.B. Nethercutt really been in raising the standards at Pebble Beach?
J.B. Nethercutt has been very important because he has been one of the guys that has taken the most difficult kinds of cars, many of them European cars and things that difficult to restore, difficult to make a car out of, and he feels like I do that the car first must have a sound foundation as an automobile before you can excuse me, before you can make it pretty. And he has done that and a great number of times. I can't remember just what the number is, but he has won Best in Show there quite a bit.
Sip of water. Yeah, please. Just about 3-4 more. We'll get you on the road.
Okay.
Newport, but just kind of touching on
Okay.
the Pebble Beach experience a little bit. I want to ask you one other question about JB. I've gone out to his restoration facility. What do you think of that? That's, to me, just unbelievable.
I think it's fantastic. For one man to be able to put all that together and to acquire all those vehicles and to put together those show places there that, just beautiful rooms, beautiful shops, everything. And now a new museum coming up. It's really just extraordinary. Have you seen the book that they've just done? Yeah, incredible.
I'm jealous. The photography is just
Yeah.
knockout. Well, Ben, you mentioned somebody else who was instrumental, Bill Harrah.
Bill Harrah, yeah. He
Go ahead. Is the mic, hello?
No,
Scott?
no, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay. I thought I saw this thing moving up and down for a while
He
there.
moved it a couple of times.
Oh, did he?
You would move just to
Oh,
make it.
so I thought there might be a human there that was actually standing behind me with this thing. Okay.
So what was Bill Harrah like, and what kind of contribution did he make to Pebble Beach?
He made a tremendous contribution because so many people had it were out to get him, so to speak. He was a great guy and everything, but he had so much of the wherewithal, the money and wealth of all sorts to go out and acquire these cars, and he had driven the prices up, or at least people saw that, and a lot of people were sulking because they couldn't do it, and they couldn't do the restorations because they didn't have the professional teams that would do it. Well, of course, we all know that any guy in his shop can do anything that anybody else can do. That's been proven over and over again. Maybe it's more difficult, and he's going to have to foot the whole bill and all that. But anybody that wants to learn how to do it, or has a few friends that can help him or anything, then do the same thing and make a Pebble Beach winner in his garage at home.
Like you did, or Jay?
Yeah, sure. A lot of people have done it.
But Bill Harrah really helped sort of increase the awareness and make people sort of excited about
Yeah.
this. Well, I'm curious though.
I'm having a hard time maintaining that. You ask me a question, I get off on another angle and don't answer the question.
Well, they're fascinating animals though, and we're all fine.
I didn't answer. I didn't make a statement as to how much Bill Harrah had done.
Well,
Bill Harrah done.
let's do that. How much did Bill Harrah really contribute to really raising awareness of Pebble Beach?
Bill Harrah was one of the real prime supporters and movers, in a sort of Pebble Beach. Always had a fine entry there of at least a car, and took best of show on a number of occasions, and I feel unfairly didn't make best of show because there was a sort of a grudge that the judges didn't even know was there, an undercurrent of resentment that they couldn't be Bill Harrah with the team behind him and everything, and come up with what should be the winning car. I felt that a couple of times at least. He should have had a first place.
But he'd still
But he still come in second, you know. But anyway, he supported the event for a long, long time, right up until his death.
Well, what keeps you coming back to Pebble Beach? What's the attraction to somebody like yourself to Pebble Beach?
I don't know. It was probably the tie-in with that first race, to tell you the truth. It was just such a wonderfully romantic thing to have happen, to go up there and have all that trouble, all those things going wrong, all the cast aluminum wheels that didn't work, and the this and the that, and the no brakes, and the clutch brake, and everything, and still win the race. It's still hanging in my brain there somewhere, and I can't forget it. It's like I owe it, like I owe the spot something.
Great. Well, a couple of quick questions. I know you have to run, but I'm curious. I've been looking at some of the lists of people, such as yourself, who are judges there. I look at Gordon Buer and Charlie Chain, Briggs Cunningham, who are really legends.
Dean Fales.
Yeah, and is that one of the things that sort of set Pebble Beach apart from other events?
Yeah, they got a bunch of honorary judges that were just really something. It was marvelous. And then the people from the East started coming out, and and filling up the field of judges, and pretty soon they became the standard as to what a show should be, what a concours d'elegance should be.
Well, now, when you're a judge, is it difficult sometimes to make a decision between, should it be this one or that one? I mean, are there some, is this...
Oh, yeah. It's not so easy when, the single make clubs have really sort of got it easy because they're experts in the field on that car, and they're surrounded with a few others of the same Lincoln guys or Packard guys or what have you. And so they can go right to it and come up with a pretty clean answer that everyone's in favor of. But when you suddenly get a bunch of judges that have varying, just a more broad sort of skill and knowledge, and they're asked to go judge a group of cars that are all different makes and everything else, it's not all that easy. It's not all that easy at all. I'm talking about the class judges, not the honorary judges. The honorary judges, they've got a different job. They're the ones that pick best of show out of the winning classes. And so that becomes a little different. It becomes like it can, if you're not very careful, if you're not really careful, it can, you're really obliged to be careful with your choice when you go down there to look over that field of class winners and come up with the one that is deserving the most.
I mean, when I look at these class winners, they're all gorgeous.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but it's also easy for a judge, once he's got the dirty work over with, to go up and say, I like that one, and he doesn't have to do any white gloves treatment or see if anything's right or know if anything's right. It just has to sort of hit him right. So he's got to be very careful that that his choice is carefully made.
I've got one quick question for you. So what about the average person? So let's say you're not all that knowledgeable about cars and all of that thing. Can somebody, just the average person, enjoy a day at Pebble Beach?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's the visual enjoyment. If nothing else, You can just go up there and look and what pleases your eye. You can get along on that shallow a dose of it all. Whereas if you go up there again and again, you might, throughout the year, without even realizing it, be osmosing yourself into a pretty knowledgeable person just by looking at magazines and reading books and what have you, and just having been turned into a car fan.
So it seems like it's a nice way to be seduced visually.
That's right.
Well, great.
Sure is.
I think we've got it. I really appreciate your time.
Good. Great.